Hi everybody, I'm Sebastian Terry and this is another 100 Things Fireside, the Surf Edition. We're going to be talking all things surfing with very close friend and high-performance surf coach Kale Brock. If you're a beginner, intermediate or advanced, or just generally interested in the concept of surfing, this is for you. Kale, how are you, buddy?
Mate, I'm good. Thanks for waking me up early.
I appreciate it. And you probably haven't gone surfing this morning too because of me.
No, and by the time we finish, it'll be high tide. So, yeah.
Okay. To begin though, my first question to you is, because we all have a moment when we fall in love with something or we think, oh, that sounds fun, I'm going to give it a try. When was it that surfing first appealed to you?
I was 10 years old and my we were surf lifesavers. So we had done nippers from the age of maybe 5 or 6. And at 10, some of the clubbies who we went down the coast with surfed, and they gave me a Malibu to use for a while and threw me out in some beginner waves. And I still remember, I've just got the image in my mind of just sort of gliding and sort of getting that feeling. And I remember saying to my mum, at the time, I was really into AFL at that time. You know, that was my sport and that was going to be my career and blah, 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 blah. I was 10, right? And I came in and said to mum, I was like, look, I think there's actually something about this surfing. She was like, yeah, whatever. But anyway, it turned out 18 years later, still doing it.
So good. Surfing is such a popular bucket list, quote unquote, item. It's almost to get going. What do they do? What actually is the first step?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not often... it's not the first question. It's like, how do I get started surfing? Well, obviously, how ocean aware are you is probably the first question, because if you're coming from a space of absolutely no ocean experience whatsoever, then chances are you probably would benefit from going with an instructor or going with a beginner class or at least going with a friend who knows what they're doing. Whereas someone who's like a surf lifesaver, for instance, of 10 years coming into surfing for the first time can probably do the old go and grab a big board, get in their wetsuit and paddle out and give it a go. So it really depends on the person. But I think that initial stage there, it depends on the person, but there can be that really steep learning curve where that progression almost in the first session happens really quickly. But then what a lot of people get frustrated with over time is that, plateau that we sort of experience as surfers. And that's something that I have to sort of communicate, I think, to people, because there is an expectation that progression will just keep occurring. And a lot of people just surf once a week, and if you're an intermediate surfer and you're an adult, especially, surfing once a week is probably only going to keep you at that same level. It's only when you start to saturate and start to really commit to it and go, 3, 4, 5, even more times per week that you can expect some consistent progression. But I think back at the starting point, it is just working out how are you going to do this and be safe at the same time, because it's in the ocean, it's unpredictable, it's water. We're not naturally, I suppose, designed for water. So those questions need to be asked and I guess considered before jumping in.
So you're comfortable in the water. There's ocean awareness. I'm, like you, fortunate enough to have grown up on the beaches. So that sort of comes part and parcel of being born on the beaches or living on the beaches. For people who don't live on the beaches, and who can't get down there every day, like you're saying, should people get an instructor? Is that a thing? Should people use your skills? So not only do you love surfing and you're a sponsored surfer and all the things, but you do a lot of coaching online as well as in person. How does that look for someone interested in beginning, but also, I suppose, just getting better, really?
I think beginning, it's all about time in the water. So you obviously want a little bit of direction, but I think in a certain sense, surfing is quite obvious. You paddle for a wave, you stand up on a board. At least if you know that, then you're probably going to be moving in at least the right direction to start with. But again, how are you going to get your time in the water safely? Is it with someone who knows what they're doing? For instance, is it, going surfing with a surfer like yourself on a date or something like that? Or is it,
I
Is
mean, I
it,
don't know why you say that. Yeah.
or is it going with someone who's more of an, I guess, advanced coach dealing with, you know, your intermediates looking to progress? Like I tell beginners, I get a lot of requests from beginners like, hey, I'm just starting, can you help me? And it's kind of like, well, look, this isn't going to be the most effective use of your time or your money and my time, because you know, you've got to just put in the work. There's no shortcutting it. You've got to get out there. You've got to become ocean aware. And even though surfing is portrayed as this sport where it's like all the exciting stuff happens when you're on the wave, people need to know that that's only 5% of the overall experience, probably less. What is most of the experience is the paddling, the negotiation, the sitting and waiting. It's the ocean negotiation which makes up the bulk of the surfing experience. So you need to know how to, I guess, undertake that. And that only comes with, you can talk about it intellectually all day and you can try and explain it, which I have in numerous videos, but I think you cannot shortcut just paying your dues and spending time in the ocean. So, you know, we talk about big boards, then we start to talk about, well, what is surfing? If you've been on a boat, you know, in a way that's kind of surfing. What we're doing is restricting that craft, restricting that buoyancy under us to a point that we still feel stable, but can also control it and catch the waves. So the bigger the board we go, the more buoyancy we can expect, which means we're going to float above the water. We're going to catch waves easier. But the shorter we go, the more we pull it in to an extent, the more control we're going to have over that craft. So using those big boards at the start is really a good idea. I definitely recommend using the foam boards, because they're just so much safer. You know, you can nosedive and they can hit you on the head and it'll suck, but it's not going to hurt you badly. We've all sort of had that before. I've got stitches and scars all over the body from a polyurethane board. So in the beginning, you definitely want a foamy. Like my girlfriend, Emma, she's been on a foamy for a few years because she's sort of at that advanced beginner level and she's looking to go for a fiberglass board. But my questions to her have been, you know, why? What's your goal here? Because the foamy right now is the perfect balance of stability, speed, and control. So it's always a bit of a balance with board selection. And then again, just finding someone to actually guide you through the process is probably going to shortcut or reduce that learning curve to a certain extent and reduce the time it takes.
So you talk about, you know, why would Emma, your girlfriend, want to go to a smaller shortboard, let's say, when she's probably just having fun down at Avalon Beach, beautiful Avalon Beach on the northern beaches of Sydney. So with that in mind, do people need to come into the sport with a particular goal? Like, for example, you know, you see Kelly Slater, you know, riding a barrel. Is that, do people need to go, right, I want that? Or is it a surf trip with your mates? Do you have to know why it is you're learning surfing, or are you just jumping in the water? Do you need specific goals?
I mean, goals help in any situation, right? Because it gives you a direction in which to go. But I think in surfing, a lot of it just develops naturally over time. We're just chasing that feeling. It's a very kind of aesthetic ambition, I think, surfing, because we get that feeling and we go, oh my God, I want that again. So a lot of it's just that internal inherent flow state, I think, that's involved with surfing. So if we wanted to become a little bit more intellectual about it, a little bit more pragmatic, I guess, we would say, okay, hey, what are your goals? If you are starting surfing as an adult, then you can forget about, most likely, I'd love to swallow my words here, but you can probably forget about surfing like Kelly Slater and getting, you know, big stand-up barrels at Pipe or whatever. You can probably, though, be quite realistic in shooting for an intermediate level of surfing, you know, cutting across the face, trying maneuvers and all that sort of stuff. That's probably going to be quite within reach, especially with some good technique understanding and some consistent time in the water. So it really depends on what you're trying to get out of it. I think this is different for a lot of people, and it's actually probably been a little bit divisive in the industry itself, certainly amongst people who watch my videos, whether like surfing should be so intellectualized and broken down into, you know, technique and physiology, and do we look at it like that? Or some people think, no, it should just be an expressive sort of art form, if you will. But with any sport, and with any extreme sport especially, the goals are going to be different for everyone. But I think at the fundamental level, it's everyone's just trying to chase that feeling, that flow state feeling, that excitement, and I guess without sounding too esoteric, that oneness with nature and everybody else that we can, hack from various other ways. But some of us are lucky to get every day from surfing.
I've got one more question. So before we get stuck into all these others, and you mentioned again, Emma learning to surf. She's on a foamy. You then also mentioned yourself getting into surfing when you were younger. Is it too late to learn surfing again for people who are watching, who love the idea, or they might have tried it once but haven't in 10 or 20 years? Can anyone learn to surf? Does it matter if you learn when you're older?
No, I mean, obviously, as you get older, your inherent fitness levels and mobility will change depending on what you're doing every single day and with your movement. So that's obviously going to have an impact on your surfing. But I think that pretty much anyone can learn. If you are able-bodied, you can surf. So it just takes a little bit of time, and being patient and being willing to go through that process is one of, I think, the keys to actually progressing. I've got some clients that have been teaching lately, and the ones who progress the fastest are the ones who are obsessed with surfing and patient and just willing to put in the work to progress. So I don't think there is a limit in terms of who can surf, in terms of how old you are. I truly think that anyone can surf. It's just about approaching it in the right way, with the right equipment, with the right people, and having, I guess, realistic expectations from it.
Okay, great. I love it. I love it. So I'm going to start asking you, rattling off some questions from people who have written in. I've got a question here from Joe Hass, and Joe Hass asks, best advice for learning to pop up on a shortboard?
I think popping up in general it's a bad name that we've given it, a pop-up, because it's actually ideally more of a slide up. And I think we're obsessed with turning the takeoff into a burpee. And a lot of the time that means the person is rushed and it throws them off balance. Whereas if you look at any sort of pro surfer, their takeoff is very minimalistic. It's a lot slower and it's a lot lower than people expect. So they're not popping up into a vertical position. They're actually sliding up into a low ready position, because by the time a good surfer has popped up or has taken off or slid up, they're going straight into a turn. They've picked their line, they're ready by the time by the time they're 4 strokes into their positioning. So I think, having the mindset that it's going to be a pop-up is the first potential error. We need to actually calm things down. That's one of my most common advice points is like, hey, why are you rushing? Slow down. And even to the point of spending a quarter of a second in that prone position. So like holding the surfboard out with straight arms in front of you whilst you've already caught the wave, just sort of gliding for a moment can be a good cue to actually pull people back into a nice flowing rhythm, as opposed to trying to control the wave. Because we really have to fit in our surfing with the wave. Because often, unless you're in a wave pool, it's always different, isn't it? The shape, the pace, everything changes. There's no wave is the same. So, yeah.
You see people on the beach, on the sand, jumping up, or images of people on ironing boards at home. I'm sure I saw that once. Is there benefit to that, just with relation to this question of popping up or sliding forward, or however you would say it? Or is it only something you can learn in the water?
I think there's benefit. The main prescription I give people, if they've got mobility issues or they're sort of struggling with their pop-up and they want to practice it at home, is to actually practice yogic movements. So especially that movement from downward dog to a low lunge, that tends to really help people, because what you're doing is you're helping them create space in that sort of plane, like from the hips up, because the more space we have under the body here, the easier it is for the legs to just slide through, into that pop-up position. So that's generally the only thing that I would prescribe. Never burpees, never push-ups. I think that stuff just doesn't transfer.
I'm sure I've heard you refer to that space that you create between your body and the board as like a negative
space.
Negative space, yeah. So it's about creating that space. Interesting.
Yeah, and that's you're pushing the board away from you to allow that negative space to form. It's not like the board stays at this level and you have to go from flat to up in a second. What you're actually doing is you're coming up into a prone, and you're allowing that board to drop down the wave as you catch it, and then just filling that space as it sort of as it drops away.
Sure. Okay. So Jalen Slade asks a question which opens the door to the conversation of board selection. He says, should I go back to high volume boards again or just tough it out with my original boards because he hasn't been surfing for a couple of months? I feel like I've hit the reset button. So what I might add to that is I you helped me with a board recently that I got. Thank you again. And I always find it interesting, like, you know, when you're trying to get better at surfing, blah, 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 there's like almost an ego play where you go, oh, I want to get a shorter board. The shorter the board, the better. It's not always the case, right? So I guess to answer Jalen particularly, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on just board selection, because I know you get asked that a lot.
It's a very common sticking point for a lot of people. But in terms of that person's situation, I think going back to a board with higher volume is not a bad thing. But when you do increase the volume, it's very hard to go backwards and drop down volume. So, I mean, a lot of my boards are sitting around that 27.2 litre mark, and that generally works for me. Even my I guess big wave board or step up board that we might call it has around 28 litres. So it's not a huge difference. So if someone's not been surfing for a few months, it can be a good idea to just glide for a while. I mean, I've got the foamy, and when it's half a foot big, I'll paddle out on the foamy, and that's 40 litres or whatever. That's a different story.
Yeah.
But just getting into that zone and getting your ocean awareness back up, that's the biggest thing about having breaks in your surfing, is working out like, hey, where are waves going to be? How do they break? Like, that's not often a timeless skill, especially if you didn't grow up with it.
Sure.
So I think that's quite important to sort of step back into gradually. And you can do that without a board. You can go, a lot of my surfers, I'll be like, look, hey, you're struggling to catch waves. What I want you to do is actually go swimming every day this week and go body surfing for a while. Because when you body surf and you've got no board under you, you have to be in the right spot, you know, and you're at that eye line level. So the water's here and your head's just here, as opposed to actually sitting up a little bit. It just makes such a significant difference in terms of the input, the informational input that you can expect, that stimuli that you then have to read and adjust your position accordingly. I think that's the biggest thing. But no, it's not a harm to actually come back to surfing after an injury or time off on a big board. It's just coming back to your regular board that can sometimes be a bit of a challenge, at least for 2 or 3, even 4, 5, 6 sessions.
Sure. So boards, you shouldn't be getting a board based on what you think looks best, of course, or you know, how you think, how good you are. It should be based on kind of like your environment, what the waves are doing. Are you going, you know, if you're going on a surf trip, which we can talk about a little bit later, you'd want to get maybe a couple. I mean, how many boards have you got in your quiver?
In my garage, I probably have 5 or 6 boards. I've got the big foamy. I've got a couple of different styles of shortboard. I've got the step up, and I've got a 20 as well. It really depends. Like, I don't need 5 boards. I would say that I ride the one board 90% of the time, just to put that out there. And I would rather have an appropriate board for 90% of my surfs than an appropriate board for only 10% of my surfs. It's a big issue. So I think, you know, in terms of how many boards you need, I truly think you can get away with one good one. But, you know, I'm sort of in a different position where this has become my vocation. So having those different boards is beneficial, not just on a personal level, but also on a professional level too. So I think, you know, if you were going to stretch it to 2 boards, then having a board for small waves and having a board for proper solid waves is more than enough for the average person. And it's not just about looks and aesthetics, even though that's important. It has to be about function, and your weight comes into it, your ability level comes into it, your expectations comes into it, your goals, and then to an extent your height as well.
Sure. Okay. I love it. Okay. I've got a couple of questions here, kind of like in the beginner's sort of realm. One question from Abraham Chu, and I'm just referencing the names from Instagram, so I'm not sure if these are people's actual names, but his question is best tips to surf unbroken waves as a beginner. And I guess that's the step up from riding, trying to catch broken waves, the white water as a very, very early beginner, to then paddling out the back. Is that right? And then catching waves that haven't broken yet.
Yeah. So that's all in positioning, and it's not It's all in positioning and paddling as well, because if we have to catch a wave before it's broken, generally it's going to move a little bit faster than a whitewater wave, which means our paddling has to match that intensity and thus be quicker. And a lot of people don't develop that paddling skill set because they don't build up the musculature over time, particularly if they start surfing later on in life. That middle back musculature that's involved in pulling your shoulders back and really paddling well. It's not so much the arms, it's a little bit of the lats, but it's very much the lower back, middle back. That musculature is just not there for a lot of people. So it has to be developed and maintained. And that's one of the biggest influences of whether you can catch a wave before it's broken or not, is how fast or how effective you can paddle. And then of course, position as well, because what you're trying to do, you're trying to be quick enough so that you can escape the whitewater now instead of stand amongst it. And it's actually a lot easier to stand on an unbroken face than it is in whitewater because there's less turbulence, right? It's more smooth. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good goal. It's a realistic goal for literally every single person. So yeah, I think positioning, paddling, most important things, and learning wave shapes and learning how to read what the ocean's going to do.
Again, just jumping in and just getting as much experience, you just sort of naturally, it's the same as kind of learning French, which I know you were trying to do as well. The best thing to do is to go to France and just immerse yourself, and you just naturally pick up so much more.
Yeah, it is. And that's why it's such an advantage to grow up with ocean experience as a surfer, you know, and you can't, it's something that it's so hard to teach. Like, hey, look at this wave, look what it does. It's never going to happen again. So it's just learning general rules and guidelines and shades of texture. A lot of it has to do with looking at the color of the ocean. That's why when it's really dark and gloomy and there's a low distinction between the horizon and the sky, it's quite hard to position and catch waves, you know? So it just takes time and immersion.
Any advice on taking off backside? She says, a right will be coming at me and I avoid it. So maybe you can explain what those terms mean to people who might not understand what a right is or what backside is. And then, some tips on that for Tracy.
So, I mean, right and left is pretty obvious, just the direction in which a wave is breaking. So that wave behind you is a left-hander, even though it's moving to the right of the screen. If I was out in the water, that would be a left-hander. Are you shredding that wave with your finger? That's amazing.
I was. For those people who are listening on a podcast, I have a picture of a perfect left behind me.
It's the left, yeah.
Okay.
So Seb's still got some work with his positioning. We've established that. So a left breaks to the right if you're looking at it from the beach, and a right breaks to the left if you're looking at it from the beach. And whether it's a backhand or forehand wave depends on your stance. So most people are natural, we would call, with their left foot forward. They would generally prefer rights, or a right would be their forehand. Some people are goofy, like you, Seb. You surf with your right foot forward, and thus a left would be a forehand wave for you, like Tracy, and a right would be a backhand wave. So a right's coming at Tracy, and she's not comfortable taking off, and that probably is just a result of rotational inadequacy. So on your backhand, you really need to feel comfortable with more twist in the upper body, because you have to look over your shoulder at the wave. Whereas if I'm surfing on my forehand, the wave is right here. It's ready to go in front of me. On my backhand, again, it's looking over that shoulder. So a lack of rotation and mobility in the upper body can make someone feel uncomfortable. And just a tiny little tip to allow a more full rotation to occur on the backhand on the bottom turn is just to, instead of holding the leading arm, which is my left, which would be Tracy's right, all she has to do on that bottom turn is actually flip that palm, and it'll just kinesthetically open up the shoulder girdle a little bit more and allow for a more full neck and eye rotation. And that will just open up a more full rotation that will then transfer into the lower body, into the hips, the knees, the feet, and then the board. And that will then engage a certain rail to then get her moving in that direction. It's all about comfort. It's all about practice. And any time I'm feeling awkward on my backhand, it's mostly because I've forgotten or sort of let that technique lapse in that front arm. And sometimes if anything's going wrong with my surfing, if I'm having a bit of a slump, which I do, then I'll go back to a 20 for a while, or I'll go back to a foamy for a little bit and just go back to the fundamentals. Like, how can I just ride this wave for what it is, instead of having too many expectations, having too many different ideas running through my mind? It's just about, taking a more relaxed approach.
Oh, that's great. And I remember you actually taught me that, like opening up your front hand on a backhand.
What do we call it when you and I
waiters?
The waiter's bow or something.
Yeah, but it really worked. It really worked. I actually prefer going to Tracy. I actually prefer going on my backside now because I feel more comfortable just because of that one tip. Okay, so you're talking about refining technique if you're feeling like you're in a bit of a slump, which is very interesting to hear, by the way, from you, an advanced surfer, having slump still and then just changing things up to get a different perspective or to tweak some part of your surfing game. I've got 2 questions. I'm going to roll them into kind of one, but one is from Rodrigo to Lawnco. I'm sure that's wrong. He said, I have different dominant feet for surf and skate. How do I practice on land? So I'm assuming what he means. Yeah, I'm assuming, does he mean that like surfing, his right foot might lead, it might be the front foot, and the opposite for skating?
Yeah, so he's probably natural surfing and goofy skating, or vice versa. It's super, super interesting. I'm amazed at how many people have told me this.
Really?
Yeah, which is bizarre. But I just say you have to commit to one, because otherwise it's not going to transfer over. There's no way around it. You just can't beat around the bush.
Ah, okay. Simple as that. I love it. Well, hopefully that's helpful for him. How does he choose? Does he already know internally? Is it just he just will choose? He just has to, if he can't.
I would say that it would be a lot harder to switch the surfing one, because skating is able to be repeated. It's got that repetitive element. You can just line up the road, it doesn't move, and you can just skate. Right. Whereas waves, you've got to wait for the right wave. You've got to do all this. There's less opportunity to put the practice into play. So what I would do is stay with the surfing stance the way it is, and then start skating the same stance. If his goal is to use skating as an intervention, a progress intervention for his surfing. Otherwise, you would just deal with it, and that's you. There's certainly nothing wrong with it. But yeah, using skating to progress in surfing is such a big help, especially obviously the surf skates that you and I have used before and filmed with before. So surfing in the same direction and having the same stance is going to be pretty important for any crossover to occur. So he's probably just got to commit and get comfortable with it. If he's already surfing in that stance anyway, then chances are he's got the neuromusculature facilitation in place to do it. He's probably just got to commit.
Okay, I love it. That's great. And so you mentioned skating before training on land. I have a question here from Hoffo, and Hoffo says, what's a good surf skate course to set up for a beginner to intermediate surfer, i.e. cones? And I've seen plenty of your videos online, which I'm pretty sure have hundreds of thousands of views, and you're using a particular board. Yeah, share with us, help Hoffo. What's a good kind of course?
So I think just playing around is the best place to start, but then just working on speed flow is probably the best place to start. And speed flow is simply a compression to extension, and it's a bit of an undulation of the body with a slight shrug of the arms, which essentially it forms the basis of all surfing maneuvers, and just liberates us as surfers so much more than just riding straight. A lot of my surfers, even intermediate ones, even ones who are approaching advanced, don't realize that they surf in the lower half of the wave only. So let's say the entire screen up from my hand is a wave. This zone here is your power zone. So I'm talking about the top third of the wave for those who are just listening. Anything underneath is going to lack generally the same amount of power potential, speed potential, same thing, that the top of the wave has. So our goal should be to actually get up into that power zone for a large portion of the ride, because that's where all our speed's going to come from. If you picture it, we're almost like a sail. We use our body like a sail, and we move up to the top of the wave, extended, to harness all that energy. And then as we go back down compressed, we're holding on to that energy, almost like a coiled spring. And we can use that spring to continue speed flowing, or we can use that spring to explode and release into a turn, a maneuver. So coming back to what the question was, just practicing speed flow technique. So that is compression to extension. Compression to extension is the most effective use of your time on the surf skates. And once you're ready to start trying maneuvers, that's when you can get specific. But I think forgetting about the cones, forgetting about all that, you can put cones out if you like and just sort of slalom between them. But I think, just using a line in the road to compress and extend, which you and I have done before, is probably the best use of your time.
I also kind of got in my head that you need to be able to like slide the tail out and, make a big noise. You don't need to do that. I'm assuming that's not important.
It doesn't transfer because there's more, on the road, you're dealing with wheels on the road. There's no actual, insertion of the wheels into the road, which is what happens on a surfboard. You've got your control systems, your fins, right? They're essentially controlled drag in the water. So they're dragging, they're points of drag, but they're also points of control. And that's why we have them. It's a lot harder to release fins or slide fins in the water than it is to slide a skateboard with that subtle weight adjustment. So I see people in these cool advertisements for certain brands doing slides all the way. And my first question is, I wonder if they can surf like that. And most often they can't because you just cannot release a surfboard's fins that easily. You actually have to be in the right place on the wave. You have to have a lot of torque and a lot of speed, or you have to hit the lip and release the fins vertically in order to get any sort of rotation. So yeah.
Okay. Well, kind of on a similar plane here, M. Reed has asked this question, tips for keeping your balance whilst turning. So she's talking about surfing, of course, or he, I'm not sure, is talking about surfing in the water. But I guess just to jump on the back of the last question, is it similar when you're skating and when you're surfing, the balance aspect, or no? Because, skating is just straight, one flat plane. Surfing, you're kind of going up and then being on an angle. I think I've complicated the question, but do with that what you will.
No, it's a good question. Speed is your friend when you're trying to balance in turns, because it's almost like riding a bicycle. If you're, what's it called? Gyroscopic stability or whatever it's called. If you're trying to ride a bike and you're going really slow, if you're trying to dinky me down to the beach at Venice to play paddle tennis and we're going really slow, then we're going to fall over, right? But if we go fast, we're more likely to stay upright. So there's an element of that with surfing. And with surfing as well, you actually won't want to become comfortable with coming off center. So when you're going up to do, especially in vertical maneuvers, if you're going up to do a vertical maneuver and the wave is here and the body's here, you're sort of going up to do the turn, and the body at this point actually comes off like this. My hand is the body, so it's sort of hanging out in no man's land, so to speak, if you're just listening. And then the board and the feet go and do all the work for you and hit the lip and then come back under the body so that there can be some sort of semblance of balance there. So it's about getting comfortable with shifting your center point or your midpoint off center with turns and sort of gauging and working out and failing and trying again and working out where the boundaries are in terms of how fast you can send that board out to do the work for you without falling off, or how slow you need to do it in order to stay on. Like it's definitely a mix of different input stimuli. But I think the first thing, all that is very cool to think about, but more tangibly, I prefer people to think about their eyes first. Where are your eyes looking? Where's your head looking? And then your shoulders, because that will determine what happens with your lower body. And a lot of people like to, message me like, hey, what should my feet do? What are my feet doing? What about foot placement? What about weight distribution? I'm like, no, forget about it. Just use your eyes and your shoulders and the rest will behave. If there's a problem, you'll naturally feel what you need to do. Because, any turn, any sort of maneuver is always started with the eyes. And then that moves into the head, the neck, and then the shoulders. And then that has a flow-on effect to the rest of the body. It's almost like you're wringing a wet tea towel. You're wringing it out. That's what happens with the body. There's always this torquing pressure back and forth to change direction on the surfboard. And it's your job, I guess, your goal, to get comfortable with that process and work out where your boundaries are. And oftentimes you need to push past that boundary to even know where it is.
Sure. I love how you're explaining this, because you think of surfing and it's, very much like an art form, right? You mentioned that earlier, like it's beautiful and lines and, all those things. I also like how you're speaking about it from a, like a biomechanical point of view. And there is so much to consider. Opening up your shoulder girdle, I think you meant, and a bunch of words I didn't understand too.
Sorry.
No, which I love it. And I'm sure everyone else does understand them. Now, one question it's just sort of dawned on me is, I know you're also posting a lot of exercise you're doing. You mentioned yoga before. Is there anything outside of surfing? We've spoken about skating from a strength conditioning point of view that's really helpful. I mean, is yoga enough, or is it, are you trying to strengthen your core, or are you running under the water with rocks like Laird Hamilton? Without getting too much in the weeds of it all, for people who do just want to, they're already able to surf, they're intermediate to advanced. What's just a few ideas on alternative types of training?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, and it's going to be an age-old question, I can guarantee. But this is coming from someone who trains. I train with a really good coach, and he doesn't surf, and I found that his training is the best for me. And a lot of our work we do around extension to rotation. So that is going from a low point, like a squat, to a high point, but also with a thoracic or lower body rotation. So we're mimicking surfing. He said his words, I think from Gary Gray, who's an old trainer or a physiologist, a very in-depth sort of guy, says it's got to smell like surfing. Your movement, your training has to at least smell like surfing. So I think the skating is probably the best thing technically, but from a strength perspective, having strong legs and a strong core and strong balance principles, balance fundamentals is never going to be a bad thing. The main issue with any sort of training, like I see a lot of CrossFit athletes and stuff like that, is they're always sore. And when they're sore in the surf, their technique gets compromised and their paddling gets compromised. And when their paddling's compromised, their wave count gets compromised. And when their wave count's compromised, they can't get enough to improve and progress. So those are the main concerns that I have with any sort of external training for surfing. Aerobic capacity can always, be improved. And I think that's always going to help. Paddling fitness, you can definitely train on land. It's very specific. You can't just, grab some pulleys and do that, or do some tricep dips or whatever. Actually working the back extensors over a Swiss ball, I think is one I've done a specific video on that. Is incredible for paddling fitness. So I think that's probably the easiest thing to train. But maybe just moving through some dynamic squats and some dynamic lunges, not too heavy weights. You don't need to use heavy weights to become a good surfer. Is something really simple to do. A lot of my lunge positions, it's not just a straight lunge, because surfers, we don't move in straight lines. I'll do a lunge pattern that's a forward lunge, a diagonal lunge, a sideways lunge, and then back around. And I'll like hit points of the clock with the lunge, and then do the same on the other leg. So it's it's varying up the typical movements that we get told about to make that crossover more accurately or more organically rather to surfing. So it's like doing a squat with a kettlebell, a light kettlebell, but then at the top of the squat, it might be going off to the side. And all of a sudden I look like I'm surfing, like maybe I'm doing an air or doing whatever. So it's just those sort of crossover techniques. But I think working with a good trainer is a good idea. Or if you have some good ideas in place, or you're just working with body weight, you can certainly do it at home.
Unreal. I honestly just fascinated talking to you about this. I've been surfing for 20 years and never thought of any of that. Which brings us on to another question from, I believe this might be one of your followers, Taj W747. Simple question. I think I know the answer. Ask Kale, who's a better surfer, you or Kale? Kale, you want to maybe tell everyone who you think is a better surfer between you and I?
Is it Taj or Taj and me or
Yeah.
Seb and I?
No, me. No, you and me specifically. It seems. I'm trying to give everyone a voice here, and that's what he wants to know. He obviously hasn't seen me surf next to you.
Well, I think surfing is subjective. There's no real winner, except unless you're surfing in a competition, and then there's certain criteria. But hey, the best surfer is the one having the most fun. In which case, I would win. Yeah,
I still think you'd win, actually. But that's true. You just want to feel good. I mean, I remember we went for a surf, it was last year down at Porto, I think. And I just remember being so frustrated, and it had nothing to do with my ability. I just wasn't having fun. And it's a weird thing. The only thing that actually matters is that you leave the water smiling. And it's worthwhile mentioning that.
100%. And a lot of people need to get realistic about that. And, I mean, there's a can of worms there, because I've had to deal with, especially throughout coronavirus and having so many people here in Australia, at least surfing, because everyone was at home working. There was a lot of tension in the water. It took out the joy in the experience, and there were fights, there were physical fights, of none of which I was involved, obviously, because I'm built like a croissant. I'm too scared. So I think that was a time when actually surfing for me just became like, it was annoying. I was really frustrated during that lockdown time, because there were just too many people surfing, and I was going to extreme lengths to go and surf on my own again. But where I was going with that was, a lot of us can get too impatient and start to, I guess, break etiquette out in the water, which is a whole nother discussion. And it just draws away from the fun of it. And I think the experiences that we get to have, even in the wave pool, like there are a lot of people against the wave pool, but I mean, that was one of the funnest days I've had in surfing. Not because of the waves themselves, but because I got to do it with you guys. And, I come out of a tube and I look back, and you're we'll say entering a tube. We're not sure if we're coming out just yet. But we're all like having an absolute blast. And that for me is one of the best. There's always those internal outcomes. So I'll go surfing on my own, like I did yesterday. And yesterday I had a really good surf for me that I was really happy with. I was landing everything that I was going for. The wind was good for airs. I haven't done an air in a long time, and I just felt really good. And there's nothing that comes close to that. It's really good. But there's that other element, which is doing it with a great community. And that sort of jumps into, the longevity film and stuff, and the other work that I've done, the importance of surrounding yourself with great people who you feel comfortable with, who you feel loved by and loved back, and all that sort of stuff. And surfing is such a great medium to appreciate that principle with. It's like I've had some of the funniest, most feel-good moments looking back and seeing a friend topple over from the top of the wave all the way down the bottom, and vice versa. It's unexplainable how fun that is. So that's the reason we do it. That's why we do it.
I love it. Well, and you mentioned before, like, a bit of aggro out in the surf sometimes. A question I hear a lot is, it's probably a slippery slope when we start talking about this one, but a lot of people who are certainly beginners, who I think maybe a lot of beginners are listening now, they have concern around crowds and, trash talking and all that sort of stuff. You also mentioned etiquette. Is that kind of just be aware, is the answer to a question I haven't quite asked yet? Be aware of what etiquette is and just, be smart. How do people avoid, aggro in the surf, basically?
Yeah, I think you've got to learn the rules. And the reason there are rules is not to protect the advanced surfers, because if it's a free-for-all, the advanced surfers are going to win every single day. If you want to paddle around and not wait your turn, then and sort of just have a free-for-all, good surfers are going to out-paddle you, out-position you, and out-surf you every single time. So the reason those rules, if you will, etiquette is to help everybody get their chance at a wave. So sort of learning what those etiquette principles is a good step, and you can just observe a lineup and you'll see it, right? You'll see the hierarchy, and I'm not opposed to it. I'm not even opposed to conscious localism. I think that a lot of these things are important, and as beginners, it can look like sometimes that better surfers or more aggressive surfers are just being pigs or greedy or whatever, when a lot of the time they are just more adherent to the etiquette and more smart with their positioning. The other day, for instance, I was surfing and I had a sort of beginner / intermediate surfer sort of break one of those rules, paddle up my inside after I was waiting for about 10 minutes for a wave at the peak, and the set was coming and the guy sort of paddled up my inside and tried to go for a wave that I was intending on going for. Now I dropped in on the guy and surfed the wave as if he wasn't there, which if you just saw that part of it, you would go, oh, Kale's being a bit of a dick. Yeah. He's just, dropped in on that guy. So what I had to do, and I really dislike doing this because, as I'm sure you know, it pulls away from the fun of it. I just said, hi, what you just did is actually called snaking. And I'd appreciate you not doing it because we're all out here, we're all waiting, we're trying to be, we're following the rules. Again, if you want free for all, that's fine, but you're not going to catch another wave. Me and the other guys are going to destroy you. So it sounds brutal, right?
Yeah.
But instead of, for instance, taking that idea on and going, oh, okay, maybe I need to learn what's going on. That surfer went into denial, started getting angry at me, and I just sort of let it go and just patted away and thought, okay, lost cause. But those situations, I think a lot of beginner surfers, intermediate surfers interpret as, oh, that guy's being a dick, that guy's being an asshole, when in fact they're following the rules more closely than they are. So that's something we need to get comfortable with. The only outcome from you knowing the rules, the etiquette more intimately, is that you're going to catch more waves and you're going to annoy less people.
I get it. I like it. I mean, the rules are there for ultimately safety.
Yes.
So, and what people you can Google these. You can Google what your surf etiquette is.
I got a video coming soon.
Yeah, and again, I'll actually be sharing a lot of your details in the comments below or in the description below. So for people who are interested in any of the stuff that we've been chatting about today, please do check out Kale's stuff. It's not bad. Mate, you're answering these questions brilliantly, so I'm just going to keep firing away at you. We don't have too many left, but to go through them, GromMum2 on Instagram, she says, how do I get over steep waves? When paddling in, I fear I'll get tossed over. Is there a simple solution?
Yeah, you got to work on your paddling technique, and also giving yourself a slight angle to paddle in on, and making sure, I guess, on steep waves, if you can be off to the shoulder safely and effectively, productively, then that's a good thing too. But that all comes down to paddling and commitment. You're much safer falling off at the bottom of the wave than pulling back and getting sucked over the falls.
Okay. Another question in my head is, as you say that, I would imagine it would help that lady if she was filming herself. Is there any advantage to filming yourself whilst you're surfing, having a friend come and film? I know you do video analysis with your sessions. Should people be doing that for themselves whenever they can?
Oh, it's such a huge, huge benefit that a lot of people don't get, because what you feel like you are doing on the wave often looks very different to everybody else and on camera. So having that stuff shown to you, and often it's a kick in the guts the first time it happens. I remember being 13 or 14 and thinking I was killing it, and then looking back at footage going, oh, wow, there's just so much to work on, and that's the most common reaction, I think, from that experience. But it is so productive because you find those technique hiccups, those minute biomechanical details, for instance, that flipping of the palm that we talked about surfing backhand, that just makes such a big difference in your surfing outcomes. It's very helpful.
Okay, cool. I like that. There's also, I saw there is a device where it's kind of like an automatic tracker. You set it up on the beach and the camera.
Solo shot.
Yeah. Does that work?
I used one for a while when I was younger and it just didn't work. It sucked. Okay. But maybe they've improved. I don't want to obviously criticize them now because they might have improved the software.
Yeah,
sorry, Solo Shot. But they may have improved now. I know there are pro surfers who use them in America, and they use the footage. So I guess it must be able to work. That technology will get better. I'm really looking forward to the day when a drone can follow your entire session for an hour. I think that'd be absolutely incredible. Or a video camera can accurately follow you for an hour. But yeah, I don't think it's right now. That's why the wave pools are so good, because you can have someone stand on the side with an iPhone. And I've analyzed a lot of clients who send me that footage and just film the wave, where it's going to be, when it's coming, when your turn is, like, it's all just there. So I think that's the wave pool benefit.
Should people be jumping into wave pools given the opportunity? I mean, as I said, we got to surf at the Urban Surf Pool in Melbourne. I've been fortunate enough to surf at the Surf Ranch, Kelly Slater's here in California. One of the best days of my life. I'm hoping that we get to go soon as well, of course.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
But they're popping up everywhere. Whether you're a traditionalist, because you hear some traditionalists say, well, I don't think that's really surfing. Just from a practical positioning for anyone wanting to improve their surfing, even just learn, like wherever you are on the scale, it's got to be helpful, right?
It's the best thing. The best thing is, I'm not going to lie. In terms of on wave progression, I should say, it doesn't help you read the ocean or catch waves out in the ocean as much, but on wave progression, it is, I think, hands down the best intervention one could apply. I have no reservations in saying that.
Great. It sounds like you were sort of like contractually obliged by a wave pool to say that.
I'm not. I'm not at all.
No,
I've been lucky enough to be invited back down to Melbourne to go to the pool, to do another video. But other than that, I don't get money. I don't get anything. I'm just a lonely little YouTuber who reckons that wave pools are an incredible tool for us to progress. There are kids now, living in Texas who are better surfers than, me, because they go and surf in the wave pool every day there, and it's got the most perfect air section. It's got the perfect tube section. Now, they might not be as good out in the ocean now, but, taking that knowledge and applying it into a San Clemente setting for a couple of years, they're going to be the best surfers on the planet. It's bizarre where this is taking us, but it's only taking us in a positive direction. Well,
Owl Be Wise on Instagram asked, and it's kind of linked into this, if Kale could fly anywhere to surf right now, where would he go? And I'm interested. Would it be an actual surf destination in the ocean, or would it be a wave pool?
That's a big question. Wherever there's an empty right-hand point break around 4 foot, rippable with some tubes, I'm flying there with a couple of mates.
What's your favorite break you've ever, out of interest? Where is that for you?
There's definitely a couple. When I lived in Byron Bay, there's a few around Byron Bay. I won't perhaps say their names, but there's a few point breaks around Byron Bay, which I'm sure most people know that are I think some of my favorite waves, because my ideal wave is a 3 to 4 foot point break. With lots of turn sections, because that's where I feel like my surfing, it really suits my surfing. I've never really excelled in big waves, that's even though I grew up in South Australia, there's access to some of the biggest, best waves in Australia. I just never excelled in that sort of lineup. So anything that allows me to sort of rip in the way I want to is the best. And obviously with a couple of tubes thrown in, wouldn't go astray.
Amazing.
Where would you go? Would you just transfer that to a left?
Yeah, for sure. Although I do like rides. I just want to get better. I'm kind of like, I'd love to say I'm advanced. I'm so far from that though. I'm just kind of right in the middle of intermediate, maybe not even.
You're an intermediate.
So just somewhere, I think somewhere where I could just surf as many waves as I could. I love the idea of a surf trip. I wanted to ask you quickly, just personally, for those who are interested, who are watching or listening, a surf trip is just one of the ultimate things you can do. Yes, going down to the beach every day in your local break is fantastic, but a surf trip, you get to pack the boards, pack your clothes, go off to a hot tropical destination and live on a boat or on land and just go for it. That's got to be something that every surfer should try and get into their schedule at some point, right?
It's the best. And it's the best. I think in terms of intermediates, there are some spots out there in the world, particularly in Southeast Asia, I'll say, where it is incredible, absolutely incredible for a surf trip for intermediate to advanced progression.
I've got a couple of questions to round this off, and in no particular order. One's more of a what would you call it? A technical question, I suppose. This is from Honza Samansky. I think I got that right, off Instagram. He or she simply says, winter steamer for Sydney, mid-range or straight to flash bomb. I'm freezing in a summer weddy. So we're talking about specs of a wetsuit in Sydney. You were talking about getting a hoodie before for a surf trip you've got coming up. Any thoughts on that?
Just get a 3-2 in Sydney. You don't need anything more. In winter, it's so nice here. It's not even a winter. It's ridiculous. It's beautiful. So 3-2 mid-range. Spend $400. I am currently wearing a Delio wetsuits. They're pretty good. I quite like them, and there are some other good middle of the range brands too.
Okay, and when you're getting a $400 wetsuit, which it's quite expensive, that's going to last a few years, right?
You hope so. Depends who makes it. You can spend more and get something like a Patagonia that is a lifetime warranty on it. It's that, and they're a lot more ecologically sound.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that price range, $800 or whatever they are, is slightly out for a lot of people. And I've heard, I don't like saying this because I love what the brand is doing. I've heard they're not quite as comfortable or flexy as the average suits, because I guess they refuse to use a lot of those flexia adaptable chemicals or materials. But yeah, you could definitely go down that route too.
Awesome. And then I think this might be one of the last questions, and I can't wait for you to answer this. Travis Nelson on Instagram asks, how do you do an air? To turn that question, and it's a great question, for someone who is looking to, add the air repertoire or the air skill to their repertoire, I have zero idea on this, by the way. Is there a first step or a couple of steps that you can maybe quickly share?
I think skating really helped me, and not surf skating. In this instance, surf skating is when we're talking about surf skating, we're talking about skateboards with rotating front trucks, right? So it simulates surfing. Now, air training is quite different. I would actually prefer someone to skate on a regular skateboard, because that really helped me as a young person practicing airs off the gutter and doing all that sort of stuff. Repeat. Airs, it comes down to speed and projection and the wave. So a lot of the times it comes down to the particular wave. You can't just force an air unless you're someone like Felipe Toledo or Julian Wilson or someone like that in the air game, or John or whatever. It's really dependent on the section. Ideally, you want to be coming from a nice, solid, big section into a small section of the wave. Like a wedge is the perfect air wave. And luckily I grew up surfing a wedge. So that is the ideal scenario, because it means you have more speed than you need for the section. And that has to be the situation, because you want to actually project above the wave, but then also back in towards the shore, because you can't just project up, because the wave continues to roll on underneath you. You actually need to project up and out towards the beach. So that's the real trick. But I mean, there are a myriad of subtle technique points we could talk about, but it's probably quite difficult to do auditorially. I need some visual help there, which I'll definitely do in some videos.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mate, what I love about this chat is that we've spoken about, choosing a surfboard, catching a wave, an unbroken wave for the first time, all the way through to getting an air, including travel, going overseas for a trip, being in a mechanical wave pool, and all the above. But the common thing that runs through all of that is just get in as often as you can and just do the things, whether you're learning to pop up or slide forward and create that negative space, or whether you're barrel riding, or whether you're whatever it is, you just get in the water. Beginner, intermediate, advanced, that seems to be the key. You can't just learn on a bit of paper. You need to just surf. And I guess my final question to you would be, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Because I think we've covered a lot. It's been brilliant, super helpful.
Good. I'm glad. No, I mean, it's the best sport in the world. And I've been lucky because I think I can come at it from both angles. I can appreciate it from a biomechanical standpoint, and I can appreciate it from an art form standpoint. I competed for a very short amount of time when I was younger, and did okay. I think I came sixth at nationals in Australia one year, and that was kind of my peak. So I'm definitely a D grade professional surfer. But I think our motivations are all very similar. And if it is an art form for you, then there's nothing wrong with getting better at your art form. Why would you not want to get better at your art form, or more interesting and more creative and more in alignment with who you are? And surfing is very much that. It is an expression of who you are. You see I see constantly these personalities on land, and I can almost predict accurately how they're going to be out in the water. And that's beautiful. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. So, and there's no right or wrongs. There's only the waves and how you choose to surf them. So I think it's beautiful. And again, all those elements we spoke about before, the friendship, the laughs that you get as a surfer, it's nothing compares to it. Emma for a long time didn't understand that, why I was so addicted and would give up any commitments to go surfing, right, when the waves are good. And now she's just starting to get into surfing. She gets it. And we're about to chuff off in the van to sort of live around Australia in the big sprinter conversion. She gets it now. It can just permeate your life in such a positive way that you can't even put it into words.
I love it. It's a lifestyle. It's an activity. It's a recreation. And more than that, it's a lifestyle way of being. And for those of you who want to check out more of Kale's stuff, it's incredible. It really is great. I'm going to leave all the information. Please do, whether it's you're after a new board or advice on how to do a certain thing that I most likely can't do, go for it. Kale, thank you, buddy. And have a great trip in the van, by the way. It does sound epic.
Pretty pumped. I'm excited to come back and hang out with you too, Sebi.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, buddy. We'll talk soon.